We're back here, Andrew Posadas, Jimmy Sullivan with you. Pleased to be joined by Edwin Mejia. He is the producer of Generation Iron, Natty for Life. Currently, as we speak, the #1 sports documentary on Apple TV, #2 documentary overall behind the recently released John Lewis documentary. Edwin, congrats on the success of the film. How are you doing today?
Doing really, really well. Thank you guys for having me on, and I appreciate you having me on talking about Generation Iron. Really excited.
Of course, anytime. And again, congrats on the success of the film. I want to backtrack a little bit. What led you in the first place to kind of put this documentary together and tell the story of natural bodybuilding?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the history of Generation Iron really started and stemmed from 2013. We started producing Generation Iron 1 with Jerome Gary, who produced the original film Pumping Iron, that many people know, obviously introduced Arnold to the world. And people were very, very, in tune with that film and the success of that. And we met with Jerome. We started producing this movie, Generation Iron. We felt like it needed a new revamp, a new modern day look. And we started meeting guys like Kai Green, Branch Warren, all these like top bodybuilders in the world today. And then it became a huge success, huge following. The movie itself documented bodybuilding as a sport, and really represented what these guys, work for is really, this true American heart and spirit. And they're just more than just bodybuilders. These guys are really smart, have a lot of humor. And then that led to us doing part 2 and 3. Part 2 documented the social media boom within the fitness realm. When you have guys like Calvin Von Moger, Rich Piana, and all these other guys. And then part 3 kind of gave a global look at bodybuilding and fitness, which really started to grow massively a few years ago. And now we have Generation Iron, Natty for Life, which really talks about the taboo topic of natural bodybuilding. A lot of people think natural bodybuilding doesn't exist. And we really, we delved right into it with a natural bodybuilding competition with INBA, which is out of Vegas in California. And we started working with guys like Rob Terry on documenting natural bodybuilders that go through drug testing. And I think today is an important topic because there's a lot of people that don't really understand it either, but don't understand the testing involved. And we were very fortunate to work with guys like Michael Hearn. He's a former American Gladiator. Kai Green, who's also been with us on the other past projects. And now he's able to give an objective viewpoint because he used to be a natural bodybuilder. And now, obviously, he's competed at Mr. Olympia and it has been around for quite some time.
And Edwin, watching the documentary, you can really see the contrast or just the amount of popularity that natural bodybuilding gets as opposed to the professional bodybuilding where there are performance enhancing. At one point, you just saw the discrepancy in between the crowd and one and the other. From your perspective, do you think that natural bodybuilding, do you think it could ever become as popular as the professional bodybuilding ranks that we're seeing now? Do you ever see it coming any closer? Or do you think having the performance enhancer, the fact that people are amazed by the body and the lengths you can go to make it big and muscular, do you think that will always have an advantage over natural bodybuilding?
Yeah, that's a great question. Bodybuilding for decades and for years has always been about the freaks, the guys on stage using performance enhancing drugs. Those are the people, and people are paying big money to go see those guys at stages and compete at arenas. But I know that there's a place for natural bodybuilding today. Natural bodybuilding has continued to grow because people are a lot more self-aware. You see guys like Rich Piana and all these other guys that have been passing away from heart disease and heart problems and really, due to steroids. And I think now more than ever, a lot of these natural athletes are bringing more attention to that, and they've been under the public eye a lot more. And they're showing a way to just how to compete with being natural and how to be as natural as possible. And they see it as cheating, and it's actually something that we document pretty well in the film, throughout the film, not only with Michael Hearn, but Rob Terry during drug testing. And I think there is a place for them. You have Rob Terry, who's a guy who's a former WWE wrestler, become natural bodybuilder. And you see that represented really well today, especially with guys like him.
Edwin, one of your interviewees for the documentary, and you talked to a lot of people within this film, you really left no stone unturned. But one of your interviewees, and forgive me because I don't remember exactly who, said that, well, natural bodybuilding doesn't necessarily exist just because of flaws in testing and how people tend to get around that and how many drugs you can't necessarily detect in a test. Is that a concern for people within natural bodybuilding, that some of the people who quote unquote claim to be natural bodybuilders might be sidestepping some of the testing or some of the enforcement in terms of performance enhancers?
Yeah, it is. It's something that we really discussed very deeply, especially with the league, because we understood they actually work with WADA, a big, the same organization that the Olympics use. But, they go through rigorous testing. These guys are tested even off season. They're also tested during season, and they have a very scheduled routine of testing that's being done. And most of these guys do go through a rigorous process of testing, and also they get put in a wall of shame and they never get to compete again if they get caught. So I think that there's a lot of risk to it, and you always have the what ifs, and you always have people that are going to delve and take the risk. But ultimately, the league it's up to the league to really show how transparent they can be with testing, and I think they've been doing that a lot more now, and it's eventually going to lead to a better process of testing for athletes to be recognized for being natural.
Yeah, and Edwin, you've been able to, in these 4 films, just to follow so many different bodybuilders. Is there something that you always find yourself surprised by in filming these bodybuilders and interviewing them and just kind of seeing their lifestyle? Is there something that you just go and say, wow, like I didn't know that? Is there something you're always learning about the lifestyle of a bodybuilder?
Yeah, it is fascinating. The first time we started working on the first Generation Iron movie, I said, who's going to watch this, right? Because, I'm like, in one aspect, it's like pretty interesting seeing these big freaks, these big guys, and then on the other end, the normal person doesn't really aspire to look like that. But the reason why we continue to work with these guys is that a lot of these bodybuilders, you get to learn a lot about them in terms of discipline, the science, nutrition, the dieting, but it's more about the discipline and the hard work, and the fact that they represent more than just muscles. They're guys that have a lot of humor. They're guys with families. They're guys that believe in a purpose and being better than their previous version. And it's very inspiring in many ways, but it's also about the science behind it. And I think that today there's a lot more attention to health and fitness and nutrition and how natural and organic, food intake, nutrition, and dieting. And I think that it's also very interesting in getting those perspectives from different people, especially with the youth today. You have so many young students and college students, high school students delving into performance-enhancing drugs that are not really being educated enough and not being told exactly what they're doing. So I think there's an educated way of actually communicating to an audience, but it's also about the science behind it and having them, just get more info. That's what we're trying to do.
Edwin, in addition to the bodybuilding aspects of this documentary, I was also fascinated by some of the background stories you were able to tell on some of these bodybuilders. Rob Terry, for example, had a surgery when he was young and now only has 1 kidney. There were other guys you talked to who had fled their home countries. How important was it for you within this documentary to, in addition to showing how strong these guys are and their regimen and their discipline, also telling their life stories?
Yeah, it's very important because what we do is with our films, and usually they perform so well because we were able to tell their stories and their background and their struggles. It's a lot of them have had really successful rags to riches stories, but also it's more important to just create empathy with our stories and have our viewers really identify and relate with their backgrounds and who they are as individuals. And that's something that we tend to do really well, is humanize our stars and our characters, and being able to really tell their stories as uniquely as possible with as much in-depth coverage as we possibly can, which is why we're a big fan of Sports Docs.
Yeah, and Edwin, I want to get your perspective on this because in other major sports, taking steroids, taking performance enhancers are frowned upon. It's almost a stain that you can never get over, especially in Major League Baseball. We've seen it, obviously, in the Olympics. We've seen it happen before. But with the professional bodybuilding, with them, it's almost accepted. They're advocates for PEDs. You had an advocate there talking about the benefits that performance enhancers could have for you in the short term. What do you think about that? Just the fact that in every other sport, steroids are frowned upon, performance enhancers are not accepted, yet here in bodybuilding, it's something that is welcomed, and those who are bodybuilding themselves feel that it's actually a benefit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, on one end, you have guys like our director, Vlad Yudin, and I, who really cover bodybuilding, fitness, and strength sports, as a whole. And then on the other end, you have a lot of these athletes and bodybuilders that, are taking performance enhancing drugs. They look at it as a way of sculpting their bodies, right? Arnold has always said it's all about sculpting. Bodybuilding is sculpting your body, right? It's like you're an artist, right? But at some point, it gets to a point where it gets too dangerous. And, we as producers have seen so many bodybuilders pass away due to heart complications. And I think it's extremely important to educate the masses on what, the dosages are, what the types of drugs are, and what the implications are if they're taken. And I think that we really try to do the best possible job with getting Dr. O'Connor and all these other doctors talking about, what are the results are looking like, and what are the athletes going to look like later in years. And I think that's an important aspect for us to cover. It's the most important thing for me as well, because we don't use performance enhancing drugs, but we have a network, GenerationIron.com, that really talks about dieting, health, nutrition, and the effects of steroid use. And I think that's very valuable to a person. I wish I had that growing up, when I was much younger, and a lot of other of my friends who also, are looking at, opportunities within bodybuilding or MMA. But I think with regards to other sports, I mean, the reason why it's so taboo in the other sports is because it does give you a competitive advantage, and I've seen it, across many sports, and it's frowned upon because it does do give you a competitive advantage. But then on bodybuilding, on the pro stage, when you have the Olympia and the IFBB, those guys are all on performance enhancing drugs. So you're to a disadvantage if you're not taking it,
Last one for you before we let you go here. If there's something that's maybe misunderstood or not quite, I don't want to say accepted, but comprehended by the general public about bodybuilding that they can take away from this film and learning about these guys, what do you think that would be?
The most important thing is to understand that, they do this because they really believe in inspiring other people, and obviously inspiring to just be natural, but also kind of creating a movement within the fitness and bodybuilding world for people to be better, feel better, and just motivate themselves to just accomplish their goals, and I think that's what bodybuilding and fitness does. It doesn't get enough attention within the mainstream sports world. And, now you're starting to see a lot of different guys like, in the strength sports world and powerlifting that continue to break these records. And I think with regards to bodybuilding, you have a lot of guys that just don't get the exposure. And I think we're happy. We're just really happy to be able to shine a light on their lives so that we can show that there is a possible way of competing naturally, and not have to use performance enhancing drugs.
He is Edwin Mejia, producer of Generation Iron, Natty for Life. Again, the #1 sports documentary right now on Apple. Edwin, again, congratulations on the success of this film, and thanks for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Edwin.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, guys.